Perfect.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, we are really excited to continue in our leadership speaker series. Today is event 3 for the fall, and I'm excited to welcome Rob Threlkeld. Before I get started, I want to just remind folks about the work of the speaker series. So, we've had a couple of excellent, or 3 excellent, or this is our third of the excellent speakers this fall, I should say. And you can catch all of those on our YouTube page. So if you're watching us right now on live stream, hi, Mom. I'm sure that you've watched the other ones, but you're welcome to watch the other ones from this year as well as from last year. Just as a reminder, last year we focused a little more on the public sector, and this year we focused a bit more on the private sector and the NGO community, which you're going to hear from Rob here in a minute. And then I do want to give a little bit of a commercial. Going forward, December 5th, we're going to welcome Sally Tallberg, who is president and CEO of Michigan Saves, which is Michigan's green bank and one of the first green banks in the country. And Sally will tell us a bit more about that. Not only is she president and CEO of Michigan Saves, she was also chair of the Public Service Commission. So she covers kind of private sector and NGO world. So looking forward to that. And then another commercial. When you join us in the room, there are bagels and coffee. So really appreciate that. So thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, all right, I'm going to get started now with my friend Rob Threlkeld. And Rob comes to us from GM, where he is Director of Global Energy Strategy. Did I get that title right? Correct. Yep. And we're really thrilled to have him here on campus. It's funny because a couple people have asked me when Rob and I met. I didn't really remember. He thinks it was 2005.
5, 6
ish. Yes. Well, one of the ways I describe Rob is somebody who has done more for the renewable energy industry and for climate policies than anyone who doesn't have sustainability or climate in his title. Because frankly, from Rob's perspective, and he'll tell you a lot more about it, but what I have learned from him over time is that he's made investments for the company and done work for the company because it makes sense financially. And so we'll dig a little bit more into that. So, but I'd like to start, Rob, just asking you to tell us a bit about your career path.
Yes. No, thanks for having me here and everything else. On a sunny day for November time period. So basically, really all started out, and I'm going to kind of go way back, but I'm not going to spend years on my way back interest. But I was concerned about maple syrup trees and acid rain and everything else, and that really is what got my environmentalism, everything kind of going forward. Fast forwarding to where ultimately I chose a career in environmental science, civil engineering, pipes, hydraulics, you name them. And that got me to the career that I am today. I've been there 26 years. Been a lot of focus on the energy procurement activities, what we can do from an efficiency perspective, and what we can do to optimize our carbon footprint. And it's been quite the journey over, I've been at GM now going on 26 years, but it's been exciting to see the change that's gone on in the industry. And it's been exciting to help lead that change too in many ways, whether it's internally through our own teams that we've got in place or externally through organizations like the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance.
Yeah, and I hope we get a minute to talk a bit more about Clean Energy Buyers Alliance because that's a really interesting association that you've been a really strong part of for quite a while, as well as American Clean Power and some of the other institutions. So you talked a little bit about maple syrup and about acid rain, but tell us more about like what drew you to this line of work.
Just about that. I want to leave the planet a better place than it is. When I was here, obviously now I have 3 kids, but there was always a strong interest on my part to ensuring that we had a clean, healthy planet and doing my part as well as what I can do beyond my part. Working in a company that allows me to scale things has been an important component of us ultimately getting to where it is today. But if I go back to the early roots, it's always been, I was fortunate enough to live near some of the largest woods, in the area. So usually not so much these days, but back in those days, you left at dawn and you came back at dusk, and generally you were somewhere in a park somewhere. And so I always enjoyed being out in the park and enjoying that and wanting to do my part to protect that base going forward.
So tell us a little bit about starting off at GM and like what your inroad was to GM. A lot of times, students at C's are thinking about where can they have impact in the public sector, in the NGO world, and certainly in the private sector. So tell us a little bit about your path into GM and then through GM.
Yeah, and it was interesting. Just prior to that, actually, I had a co-op job at General Electric for 5 years. So interestingly enough, I not swayed away from the general component of that. Um, but and it was really interesting too at the GE stage. Before I get into this, I'm not long sidetracked here, but at the time they were building the original GE90 engine that was going on the 777, and that was a massive engine. I mean, just massive engine to get to do that to be built was just phenomenal. But fast forward, a lot of that engineering and everything went over to Lockheed Martin. I had interest in cars. I've always had interest in cars, and so I started my early career, really at General Motors, focusing in on. I had two options when I came to General Motors, which they weren't hiring a lot of folks back in 2000. The environmental route, which had more on permitting, or the energy route, which focused a lot on energy efficiency and design out. Um, and I chose the latter, and I really chose the latter because I want to get my hands, feet into the dirt and the dust and the mud. How are we fixing these things? What are we really doing to, improve the environment? How can we optimize the systems that we have in order to improve the environment or replace? And so that's really landed me the job that I have today over the last, call it 26 years. It's significantly expanded since that time. There I was an engineering student sitting at a desk on one or two projects. Fast forward to today, I lead the team that does the procurement, the renewables, the construction, the energy efficiency, you name it, demand response, we've got it all.
And how interesting that that path is also intersected with propulsion for vehicles, right, on the EV side. So now they have sort of intermingled, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, that was an early one. Once I called EVs, oh, this is what's going to happen. I mean, we really need to electrify. What we've been doing on the GM and the manufacturing side has been great. And we've done a phenomenal job of doing it, but it's how do we continue to marry load with generation, and EVs really, in my way, were the natural source of doing that. So I was very interested in looking at how electric vehicles can be an attribute to the grid versus a detriment to the grid. We did help form the virtual power partnership, our VP3, which focuses on virtual power plants and what they can do to help support the grid as a whole. So, as you look at it, it's really over the years of me learning the grid, it's understanding where are the next big things that we need to be focusing in on, rallying companies around this specific area, and then how do we rally the regulators in the same space.
Yeah, and I find that virtual power plant space like to be the most fascinating. So, but we won't go there yet. So in your time doing procurement work for GM, I'm sure it hasn't all been sunshine and roses. I'm sure it's been sort of a up-down path in terms of progression. Can you tell us about a place that's been, or a project that was particularly thorny that you're really proud of how it came out?
Yeah, it's one of our last, you are correct about that. So one of the unique things I can say at General Motors that we've got is my team operates under the delegation of authority, which means we do all the direct procurement of services, whether it's energy efficiency, renewables, traditional energy resources, demand response. We actually do it from an engineering perspective. We don't go to purchasing. So it's great. In many ways, it allows us to move fast. And in other ways, it also can slow us down because I can't just go sign checks whenever I want. I still have finance controls, accounting controls, legal controls, and everything else of that nature. And so, as you know, in today's world, called the 2000 to 2016, 17 time period, you could take 3 or 4 years to negotiate a PPA, and that was fine. Nowadays, as you fast forward to really meet the goals that you need to sign these PPAs within months, if not sooner, because you have large tech companies, frankly, that's great for them. They're going out and sourcing much larger loads than we are. And so it's really trying to find that balancing act. And I think a lot of it comes down to developing the relationship with the suppliers who know that we have done it replicable times with them and that we're serious about the job, serious about the projects we're doing with them in order for them to have comfortable that we actually are going to stay with them in the long run. So I think, the last couple months have been most challenging when it comes to that because, they were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and we're not that fast, and they've got tech companies that are in the wings ready to sign the deal tomorrow. And it's through those types of relationships that we've been able to be successful, and maybe I wouldn't call it delay, but for them to have some patience as to when we're going to ultimately execute.
Yeah, it's probably been tough too as the economy has shifted and knowing like where you're going to be able to make the investments just because of the changing in federal policy.
Yep. Yeah, that's been a complete shift. It's been interesting. I mean, I guess one of the benefits for us from the US perspective is we met our goal to get 100% renewable electricity at the end of this year. Um, More or less met that goal. So thankfully in the US, we're good. Mexico, Brazil, Canada, we're starting to look at different opportunities as far as what we've done. In fact, in Mexico, we just did, no, not Mexico. Brazil, we just did our first biomethane projects from a landfill that's utilizing biomethane in paint shops. So we're looking at different opportunities, both from a scope one as well as a scope two.
I kind of want to like zoom back in on something you just said. So you've hit your 100% renewable energy goal for the US.
Yep.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about like what kind of projects went into making that happen? Because and the scale, like that's a lot of power.
Yeah, we're looking at here, yeah, gigawatts. Really, I always look at it, how you look your portfolio of what you invest in. And I would say about 50% of that is on-site wind, 50% of that is on-site solar. And what we are also uniquely, what we've done is source projects that are within proximity of our manufacturing footprint. Sure, I could go source a project in Texas, call ourselves 100% renewable electricity in Michigan. On paper, it's great, but in all reality, have we changed the emission footprint in the state? The answer is no. So what can we do to change the emission footprint in the states that we have for manufacturing operations that not only supports emission reductions, but supports local jobs, supports infrastructure improvements and everything of that nature. So a lot of our projects you'll find are within relative proximity of our major manufacturing sites, or even on top of our major manufacturing sites, because we do have some on-site solar projects as well.
How does this get communicated to tier one and tier two suppliers? Like, are there any conversations that you have with them about what you're hoping they'll do to feed into the GM grid?
Yeah, so we work with supplier partnership, which is a great way to segue for getting renewables pulled into the broader efforts that the supply chain can do. And we work quite closely with the supply chain too. We work in 13. Don't know why, but and we do work with our global purchasing supply chain organization to kind of roll that out as well, so that they get to be able to articulate the strengths we have. In fact, we have our own kind of like renewable energy notebook that they kind of listen to and pull out if companies have questions about that station. Obviously, the larger suppliers have the ability to reach out to us directly. In some cases, no different than us reaching out directly to utilities, but to be able to scale some of that. But I would articulate a lot of the times I've pushed join the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, look at other associations that are in this space, and your voice is important.
So let's talk a little bit about like Clean Energy Buyers Association, the virtual power plant program with RMI, and like American Clean Power. Like, how do you feel like those organizations have been a component of what you've been able to build at GM?
They've been a critical component. When you look at CBO, this Clean Energy Buyers Association, it's really been about scaling up renewable. And you look back to the early days of STEVA, which we were one of the founding members, it was primarily focused on PPAs. We've now, I think we're 50-50 PPAs and green tariffs. I think the utilities woke up and said, hey, maybe we should join this, train ride too. And so,
Water's warm, jump in.
Exactly. It's warm, jump in, let's go. So, they've kind of jumped in. The other thing they saw the benefit was the energy efficiency efforts that are associated with that, because, for us to meet our goals isn't just going out and sourcing renewables. It's really across four pillars. It's how do we reduce energy efficiency? So how do we reduce what we run and measure it? How do we then replace with what we still have with renewables? How do we then look at storage? Obviously, being a car company with EVs, leveraging that as a way to shift the grid. And then the other one's policies and scale. And so it's really kind of getting back to that fourth one, where companies can really get involved in the various different organizations like the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, American Clean Power Association, and others have emphasis in this space, because that's really going forward in the future. The biggest changes are going to be in the policy space. I mean, we need permitting reform, we need transmission build out, we need the ability to build stuff inshore, because a lot of people say, oh, we're going to go build a bunch of gas plants. Yeah, sure. The earliest, if you announce a gas plant today, is in the low 2031, 32 by the time you do it. It's no different than ordering a jet engine or a jet plane today. Between Boeing and Airbus, it's kind of this, okay, I ordered it, I'll get it in 5 years.
Yeah, I don't think people really understand the lag time in the supply chains right now, particularly when it comes to those types of engines. Yeah. Looking at the investments that GM has made, can you talk a little bit? You've already mentioned, the shift from virtual power or power purchase agreements to like the green power tariffs, but you also have done a lot of investment directly in build. How do you think about how you want your portfolio to mix between on-site renewable build and then PPAs and virtual green power tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool to build stuff on site. The problem with building stuff on site is, one, it excites the employees, you get to see it, but number two, our footprint changes all the time, and we've had to move arrays and do different things of that nature. So I've kind of backed off a little bit to some degree on-site renewables as a result of, we want our footprint to grow because that means more jobs. So that means moving off-site, and that's where our green tariffs and virtual power purchase agreements have been kind of integral to getting our 100% renewable energy going. And let's just, hypothetically say I covered the entire assembly plant, all of them in the United States, it'd be about 30%. So it moves the
If
needle.
you covered all the assembly plants with solar,
Yeah.
it'd be 30% of your, that's interesting. Okay.
So we do look at opportunities, but once again, we run into the same complexities that everyone else is. Hey, what's the interconnect time? When do we do this? Do that? Gosh, it's behind the meter, but you're telling us. So.
Yeah. No, yeah. And you can do a lot behind the meter, but you still, if you're building bigger, you got to deal with interconnection queues and not only are you dealing with the Michigan interconnection queue through MISO, but you're dealing with like the whole country and the whole world. So, are there places that you find it's easier to procure renewables or build renewables?
It's shifted over the years. I would say definitely California early on, New Jersey early on. I do think now your ability to build out in multiple states has now grown. I think Michigan isn't overly complicated. You can get it done, but it's the early adopter states that have now started to put up some roadblocks, Illinois too, and how much they want to grow, but at the same time, they also understand some of the challenges that come with it. So it does slow some of that down, but I think you can definitely do it in all 50 states now. Certainly you can look online and find out which states you can do it faster. It's still very new technology in many jurisdictions. So finding the AHJ and the others that actually familiar to be able to sign off on something like this still does take some time. But I do see the speed is starting to accelerate in these areas.
That we need it built faster.
Yeah.
What slows us down in Michigan?
Really, it's just the permitting process and then ultimately the interconnect.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at it from an EV perspective, just to connect EVs now. When you do bidirectional EV, it's the interconnect.
I do want to do bidirectional EVs.
I know. And unfortunately, it's takes time. One of those things where it's like, come on, this is good for the environment. This is good for you, but we have this process. Like I know this is an archaic process based on 1976, 77, PURPA requirements. Now it's important to what does it mean today and how you can actually control most of that today.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more control out there than what they think.
Yeah.
I think to some degree they hide behind the curtain because of the uncertainty and two, lost revenue. I mean, if they don't balance this right, it's a lost revenue thing. So.
Yeah. I know, well, I think we all know that things are just moving really fast. And so figuring out how to keep that policy and those permitting processes caught up to technology, I think has been really tricky.
Totally.
Yeah. And it's tricky from a government perspective. It's tricky from a utility perspective. Like it's kind of hard all over. And I'm sure, honestly, it's hard from the auto perspective too, from the OEM world.
Oh yeah. I mean, having been in this space for 26 years, I would say 20 years, day in, day out, same thing, because focused on energy efficiency, focused on paying the utility bill, put scorecards together, look at areas from optimization. And now, it's really around increasing electric rates. So cost control, risk mitigation, sustainable supply. those are hugely important right now. You know, as we look at ensuring that we are viable as a manufacturer, but the system's viable to provide these their tools. It's a system-wide problem, which interestingly enough, you work with a lot of other companies when it comes into this space, but it is a challenge going forward into the future. Next 10 or 15 years of my career before I retire is going to be very, I wouldn't want to say fraud. I don't want to throw a bunch of red flags out there, but it's going to be much more challenging than the last 25 years.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how it's changed. I think that, sitting in today's world, without having like the last few decades of hindsight, like, energy tracked with GDP growth. Like we've never seen energy growth the way that it is now. And we do have a lot of technologies in order to answer that growth. But we have to move faster in order to make the puzzle pieces fit together so that we don't have affordability crises.
Right. And I think the other question that's out there too is obviously AI is a big thing, but how much of this AI is actually going to get built? I mean, that is another big question. There's going to be a lot built. There's no doubt in my mind about that. The question really becomes how much does ultimately get built? And how do you then figure out who pays for those assets when it comes time? Trust me, I know it from my end. When we build battery cell plants, they're significantly much larger loads than our traditional assembly plants. Some of the language that has been put on us. I hope that that's what the large scale data center companies are getting put onto them because they're way different.
Oh, the language is in the contract?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whether they protect more or not, hopefully they do. But
Well, and that's interesting, right? Because we have a little I've been paying attention to Michigan, so we have a little visibility to what's happening in Michigan, particularly with the consumers tariff that just came out a week ago for data centers. And then, DTE's filing 2 weeks ago for the Stargate facility down in Saline. But that's just one in Saline. And then there's what else is on DTE's list. And then how does the consumers tariff play out? But I think there are more T's and C's in that tariff, right? That are going to more align with, for lack of a better term, other industrial base or regular industrial base. Because honestly, one of the things with data centers and AI is they're just industrial build from one perspective, right? Like we can have an ethical conversation about AI and how we're using AI. Like that's certainly, I'm setting that aside for the moment. But when you think about it from a water and energy use, it's just load. And so we need to respond to it appropriately, obviously, but it's just more load.
it is more.
A lot more load.
A lot more look, by far. And they love the water. The other thing, we are surrounded by water, so.
Yeah, actually, I've been digging into that water piece, but we don't.
Our piece is an interesting one because it's hidden.
Okay, all right. So, since you kept going, I'll keep going too. So, but like, here's what I've found so far is, especially if it's a closed loop cooled system, it's not actually using that much water other than in construction. Like, there's not actually a lot of consumptive use.
It is true. Based on how they blow down their systems a lot more, even though they're a closed loop system. So conductivity of the water that comes out of their closed loop systems is much. I would say it doesn't run like conductivity run like a paint shop for the industry, at least from what I've seen.
Okay.
That's not to say every data manufacturers the same way, but it means they blow down a lot more water than what is known.
Well, and if we're discharging into wastewater systems, we have a lot of visibility into that. So that's, yeah. So we'll see.
We shall see.
We shall see.
It's going to be very complicated, but very for the young engineers that want to grow in a space that are going to be way faster than anything else.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's probably pretty interesting for you to sit in the seat that you're in, given all the work that you've done at GM. And again, the way those streams have crossed between vehicles and electricity as fuel, so to speak. Like just looking forward to, just the virtual power plant thing, for example, is just so fascinating. So I'm curious, how much you've been involved in getting that. I know you were involved in getting that initiative off the ground. Where do you see GM's role in that going forward, and where do you think it's going to go?
I think it plays a big part in our electric vehicles. Potentially, we get into the battery cell business as well. I know there's been stops and bits in that, but I think that is your accessibility to the market. But accessibility to the market needs to be scale. And you as a homeowner, hey, I want to bid in 2 kilowatt hours. It's going to get crickets on the other end of it. So you really need to have that aggregator build up that and say, hey, I've got 10 megawatts available or 15 megawatts available to be able to go out and actually source this at this point in time. And I know I have it. So I think, but that requires regulatory reform too, because, you have to have the ability to go bi-directional. So there's a lot of regulatory elements of this that have to happen. I say pleasantly, NARUC is discussing this, National Association of Regulated Utility Commissioners. They definitely are discussing these things because it's coming fast and furious, and they know it's a solution. It's just a matter of how do you protect the system at the same time you're protecting it from cybersecurity and some of the other challenges, which obviously are much bigger.
Absolutely. And you've also touched on something that's super interesting that I learned over the course of my career that you know way better than I do. GM is a global company. They have obviously a large footprint in Michigan, but they're thinking about being active in all these jurisdictions, right? So like in my seat in government, like obviously I was looking at the state of Michigan and 2 IOUs plus all the munis and co-ops, but you guys are looking at that across the country as well as across the world. You're looking at, ISOs across the country, ERCOT, like there's just a lot more that you're thinking about from a jurisdictional perspective, and that you have to figure out how to navigate in a way that isn't cookie cutter, that's appropriate to the jurisdiction, but also allows you to move with speed that's necessary for the company.
Yes. I mean, and you kind of, on the spot right there. I mean, the IOUs are typically a little bit slower. The municipalities, the rural co-ops can generally go a little bit faster. Maybe we're one of their largest loads where they have rates specific to our company or to GM. That enables them to look at some of these new types of technology in a rather fast basis so they actually can, trial these things. And so, but it does depend across the board because we operate across just in the 3 states of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, across municipalities, rural co-ops, and investor-owned utilities. So they all present their own challenges. They all present their own opportunities. And depending on who the shareholders and stakeholders are, that's another whole gamut of who drives some of the answers that come out of the work that you want to do.
Yeah. Which makes me think a bit about renewable build. Do you guys do any build yourself, or you typically just work with developers or with IOUs to actually do the build?
We've done both.
Okay.
We've done some with gold, and then we've done some with IOUs. Really kind of comes down to space. I think with what we've got left right now, it's land-wise, it's becoming a premium, which is building out our facilities. So I don't see a lot of on-site renewables for that.
Do you have on-site wind? Okay, just on-site solar.
On-site solar, then we have on-site landfill gas.
Have you guys looked into using energy storage to balance out your grid demand?
We have. We're starting to study the areas with the highest demand. Once again, short cars and it's a very cumbersome process to do it. And then just battery technology, you change that in.
Yeah.
So I work very closely with our battery team to understand what we can do in this space.
Yeah, it's got to be really interesting since you've got a mobile battery team that can also think about, I mean, they're different uses and different technologies, but there is overlap in terms of the understanding.
I think it's a big part of additional when I talk around resiliency of our operations. I do think it's critically important that we put some sort of battery storage in our facility. It's just a matter of when do we start to see the power outages or other things to start to drive the business case to say, hey, we need to do this now. Because it's interesting, if we go down to Mexico now, I mean, building a plant SLP, but between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m., the diesel generator kicked online because they were on peak rates. So they ran the generator for 2 hours to avoid the peak rates because peak rates are really expensive.
Wow. Prime opportunity for a battery.
Exactly.
Yeah, we'd love to see that for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. I was curious, what do you feel like over the course of your career you've been the most proud of? Is there a project that you can point to that you're really, that, you think of as your legacy?
I would say for me, it's really scaling up renewables because it's, starting with the first 1 megawatt solar array in 2005, which at the time was the largest solar array. Scaling multiple gigawatts now has been probably my proudest opportunity of what I've been able to do in this company, be able to do it in an industrial company.
because, you know, I stay close enough to know what Google's and Meta's and all those do. And I'm like, gosh, I can do it too. So that's probably one of my proud moments, being able to get that sort of skilled manufacturing organization and get people to see, hey, it isn't just big tech that's doing it.
Yeah, and you were doing it before, really. Yeah, so and just so people know, like Google, Meta, Microsoft, they're all members of CEBA, Clean Energy Buyers Association, where GM is a founding member and participates on the executive board. So what are you most looking forward to in the next few years that you think is going to be really exciting?
Deployment. We want to deploy now. We've got deploy more storage out there, and integrating some work with policy space. I do think there's a definite interest in the policy landscape to address cost. And in order to address cost is going to mean how do we best integrate storage, some transmission, where it is, in order to do that. So I find it to be a very exciting space because it's not changed for a long time. And I do think the last part of that is I do think nuclear is going to have it takes a little longer going out. So I see it looking like this, energy storage roads, rates, controls to be able to expedite some of these things that nuclear a little further out there because that just takes time.
When you think nuclear, you're thinking like SMRs? Okay.
Maybe a few restarts like Palisades here. Maybe you get like on a few of these late shutdown facilities and get them restarted. They're not that big amount.
No, there's not that much opportunity. Although DTE does have a nuclear permit too. Fermi 3?
3.
Yeah. So that's an interesting piece of the puzzle.
I think it'll come down to do these loads truly materialize?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look at the amount of load that's going into these queues, it's astronomical. And it's kind of like, wow, okay, is that really going to happen? And some of these companies were put into these queues you never heard of. It's like, it's not like you haven't heard of it. Apple or it's some company XYZ from since who are they? Are they really going to build a big data center?
Yeah, and in some cases it's hoteling, right? Where they're just hosting, and then in some cases it's your big, NVIDIA's and Google's and etc. Yeah, so it is really going to be interesting. We're definitely going to get more load. The question is, does it hit all the numbers? And I think like we saw early with the renewable build too, some of it is just exploratory, right? Where we're seeing, to your point, companies going out there and saying that they're going to build, but it doesn't end up actually happening. So I think that seems to be paralleling some of the early renewable development too.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other part of it is how much this gets in-house versus out-house when it comes to what companies do or don't do in light of, the issues. Recently, what happened with bananas not going down. All of a sudden, the airline industry goes crash because they can't reserve or do ticket. So I think we're going to see some of that kind of assessment of how much do we do in-house versus out-of-house.
And I would imagine GM uses a lot of data too.
Lots exciting about.
Yeah.
I just don't know how much.
Yeah. You're like, I provide the power, but I don't run the data.
Give you the power. Yeah.
Yes.
Don't call. If the power is down, then call.
Do you see more connection in the future between your side of the world and the vehicles because of more EVs going hitting the road? Okay. I like it hugely. Is that going to look different for your job?
But yes, I mean, and I actually helped found the energy side of the business. As I said, the EV side is a solution, not a challenge to where the grid has got to go in the future. So what they do here from a virtual power purchase, bi-directional, however you want to call it, directional, is going to have a benefit on this side of the equation. So we do talk quite a bit, on the abilities to leverage both sides of the business. To me, frankly, because it used to be ice, I had no touch to ice except to, make sure their factories had power. Now it's a matter of, okay, how do we optimize the power that's going to these vehicles? How do we optimize the battery that's within the vehicles at that time? And then how do we then with what the grid's doing, and then finally, at what point do we discharge? And you're gonna need an aggregator, or somebody that does all of that. So, I think the big education part of that is ultimately educating the consumer that now this battery is being used way more than what you feel like you're controlling combustion engine. Hey, I'm gonna borrow your engine. It's gonna take some of that reward. And as I've told everybody that we look in the virtual power purchase agreement space, in the end, the customer has to be the one that sees the value. If they don't see the value, you will not be successful. So the utilities, the aggregators, the companies like GM, if we think we're going to get 99% of the pie, the consumer gets 1%, we're not dumb. They're going to go, I'm not signing up. And we saw this recently. I don't know if you saw this last year. I think it was territory in Colorado, but it was this long-term tariff that said they could interrupt your air conditioner, and they give you $25 a year. And it had been in place for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. It was a long, long time. And it was a very hot streak of days, and all of a sudden they needed a power, and they shut your air conditioner off. These people hadn't been told, no annual updates went out to them, no nothing, or anything. All they knew was their air conditioner went out on a 100+ degree day. And they were upset as you couldn't believe. Well, I only bought this house. Why can you control the air conditioner? One, they didn't communicate to the customers that were part of the program. Two, they didn't routinely do that. Three, they didn't give, hey, if you change homes, by the way, did you know the previous homeowner was, on this multitude of things, but that just shows you in a small space as you start to grow beyond the sphere of what you can do from an electrification around your homes, EVs, which are much larger. It's going to take some education and learning. Otherwise, you're going to have those types of instances, which that one was a small instance compared to, all of a sudden, you discharge a bunch of EVs.
Yeah, and we've got a degree at C's that's specifically around communications, and I think about things like this all the time, right? Because it's a huge opportunity to talk about it and to make sure that people are on board, and it can also be just a really big hole for companies as well as for the public sector if we get it wrong. Like there's so much more communication that's necessary in this space. The thing I love about the opportunities around electric vehicles is I think we can figure out a way, in my opinion, to make it cheaper for people to drive electric because they're going to have an additional revenue stream. But we also have to make it a ton easier because, like, we have 3 electrics in my house, but I also live with 3 engineers, and I'm a bit of a fanatic. So like, it's got to be easy. It's got to, it's funny. Hopefully, my dad's not watching because my dad said to me, he's like, show me how to drive your Mach-E, and I'm like, I don't have to show you, And that's one of the things that's nice about the new electrics too is they feel just like cars, if that makes sense. There are some cars on the road where you get in it and, I want my father-in-law to be able to get in the car and drive it as opposed to like have to flip through 3 screens to find the windshield wipers, right? So my point is that people that are studying in this space how to communicate really have important roles in the future because we have a lot more communication to do, not only broadly on like what's going on with climate and how important that is, but specifically, how are these technologies making people's lives better, right? And we know it, but and you're an excellent communicator, but we need students to be studying this area in order to help us figure out how to do a better job communicating this to the general public.
No, absolutely. Rubbing your clothes and cleaning it all off there now. Otherwise, she does it all herself. Does it on delicates or heavy duty and all that stuff. I mean, it all started from your one putting it in a suit. So, that's similar thoughts. It's educating. Wow, this is so simpler to do as long as it provides value to the customer. The customer can see that value. That's the other key thing. Is the customer needs to be able to see that.
And then we'll use time of use rates to shift when you're using your washing machine to make sure that you're doing it at a time when the grid can handle it. Yeah, it's great to see all these things fit together. So, all right, I'm going to do my lightning round questions because I have the feeling we have some questions from the audience. So my first lightning round question is favorite place. Ooh, that's a good one. I got married in Mackinac. First job, like first job, not like, GM or GE, but first job.
Bring us in street grass.
Interesting. Which Franks?
That's so Indiana.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Recent book or podcast that you're reading, listening to that you think we should all pay attention to?
I got a lot of those on.
I know you do.
You probably don't even want to go down the path of some of the ones that I go down, but, I was reading
About
about El Reno tornado in Oklahoma.
What is the?
El Reno
Reno
tornado that
tornado?
killed a couple of the famous storm chasers.
Okay.
So I've been reading a little bit about that, but,
Interesting.
yeah.
All right. Meteorology. I love it. What never fails to make you laugh?
Never-
Caitlin.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Everybody always says they're kids.
I would have to say, being on some deck or something like that and having a coach come up and say something. But then I just kind of walk away with a smirk on my face. Yeah, okay.
I like it. I like it. All right. I'm sure we've got some good questions from the audience.
I knew we would. No, go ahead.
And Munir's going to watch
Watch us online.
to see if we get any. Okay.
Hi, I'm Annabella. I'm a first year environmental policy and planning student at SNEES. I'm obviously thrilled to hear you say that the policy sector is growing in your field. And I guess one of my questions is what biggest changes do you see happening in policy and permitting or interconnection policy that would make the biggest positive impact for projects that you have in investment?
Yeah, the biggest area of policy around permitting reform and the ability to really build out transmission. Who pays for that? I mean, that's the biggest challenge right now is how does all of this build out has to happen, and we all agree that it has to happen, but how does it get built out in a way that frankly doesn't over incentivize restaurant utilities to get them to go over return on their investment. But we also see a benefit as far as the improved reliability tied to this investment that's going forward. So, the biggest areas right now are really going to be in, transmission, some degree generation, putting it into a rate structure that actually makes sense and looking at it from a comparison perspective. Because one thing that's a little bit different nowadays than what it was back not too long ago. Different states built coal plants, nuke plants, and their prices were kind of all over the ballpark, depending on what they did. As you build new renewable energy assets, battery storage projects, their span of what I would call cost is a lot more narrower than span of cost in the new plant. We saw it in Georgia with Vogtle nuclear plant was like $28 million. So. You could build a lot of gas plants or a lot of solar plants for way cheaper.
I think what's interesting too about what has spanned your career is environmental regulations, energy policy and planning. Like those end up being different segments in some ways, and yet in your career, and then EVs and mobility. Like for you, you're fortunate that it's all been connected.
Yep.
So, great question, Annabella. Greg, I knew Greg was gonna have good questions.
Sharing your perspectives and experience with us. I was just looking up one of my slides. I teach a class on sustainable energy systems.
Mm-hmm.
I have a slide of GM warehouse in California. One with solar deployment. And, anyway, just appreciate what you were talking about.
Probably my project.
I can show you that. Yep, that's it. So I thought maybe that was good. But
Yeah.
I have another one here. Feasibility assessment of General Motors B2B bi-directional charging for workplace application. A report that a student did a capstone project. Anyway, I'm interested in I'm with the Center for Sustainable Systems, co-founded that 30 years ago. And we do a lot of life cycle modeling of products and technology, a lot of work on transportation. And we're about trying to help accelerate clean energy transitions, climate action. We know what's going on with regard to what's happening in Washington with policy. Just reading in Detroit News about how many battery plants laid and set back. And wanted to hear from you about your perspective, because we also understand just how this could affect US competitiveness, because what's going on in China with EV manufacturing is incredible. And it, I'm from Michigan, I'm born in Detroit. It really troubles me what's happening and how that policy is see the impacting our industry competitiveness. But we don't really hear a lot from the OEMs about what's going on and how you are navigating, or how we could do more to push back on what's happening. And I don't know what you could share on it, but we're missing targets with vehicles, like vehicle sales are slowing down. That's a credits, everything else going on. But I'm just curious if you could share anything about how are you just basically saying we're going to continue our plans with regard to deployment, or at least expect that they'll ramp back up?
Unfortunately, I'm not really the one who can answer a lot of those questions, but I can kind of go back on a couple of things that you commented on that might answer some of the questions that you did ask. Yes, I mean, we obviously have facilities that can build ICE and EV. I mean, I think that was an important component of Mary and Paul Jacobson and others to be able to kind of just put in our footprint based on demand. So I think that's smart. You go back to General Motors in the 80s and 90s, we built one vehicle. That was it. If that one vehicle didn't sell, that plant didn't run. So now we run, 3, 4, 5 different lines across that. So we're able to kind of optimize that footprint. Two, I do see you're kind of at a tipping point where I think, yes, it's unfortunate the federal incentives went away, but people still build laptops, they were incentives, everybody else. The convenience factor is still there. I mean, it's just, and charging infrastructure is continuing to get built out as far as EV charging infrastructure goes. And you've got some pure EV manufacturers out there as well that are very keenly watching those get done too. And you do have Iowa, which is kind of a consortium of 7 different automotive OEMs building out infrastructure. So I think we're going to continue to see the EV infrastructure being built out. The other interesting thing, I come from a railroad industry. My dad worked in Pennsylvania Conrail. And to give you a little bit of a picture on things, people are like, oh my gosh, we're going to in the next 5 years. Boom, flying out the door. We're done. I don't know how many people know, but General Motors built diesel electric motors for trains. EMG, which was out of Illinois. And they did it in a way that maintained reliability, which was some of the struggle we earlier EMGs. When those started to roll out to this Norfolk and Western, late 80s to start to prove out, the last steam engine did go offline until 1959. So it took 20 years. Even in an area of technology that, because they're all, these, whether they're steam engines or whether they're your vehicles, they're there for 10 plus years. So, time is something that has to kind of gradually change some of the changes that occur.
Yeah, I understand that, you got this car park that convert that, but it just seems like the OEMs had these very aggressive goals. The previous administration had a very aggressive goals for sales by 2030, 50%. 20. So it's just troubling because I think the OEMs really, were really committed, but then if you don't have consumers need incentives, it all kind of falls apart.
Yeah, and I think it's a great example of why
China.
it's why policy matters, right? And China's got the policy, the EU has the policy, right? And the policy really drives those outcomes. So it can be really tricky. Yep. Andrew?
Thanks so much for the talk today. I'm a second-year student here at SEAS. I also got to work at GM Energy this past summer, so I was really excited to come to this talk. I worked on some customer facing software and sort of like the topics around like EV education, but also like B2G as a customer and a company value proposition I was really interested in. Lisa stole my original question, which I knew she would, so I made up another one. But I got to, in developing some customer facing tools, learn a lot about the customer experience of EVs and B2G and all of this stuff. And one of the things that I know is being wrestled with both on the utility scale side and on the like home system install side is like workforce and the ability to have accessible, well-trained electricians in the technologies that you're releasing to be able to do the jobs, whether it's, building utility scale or doing these installations. And, there's so many variables. I learned on the customer side that, it's much cheaper to have a home system installed in an urban area than it is like if you live, down a dirt road, and it's going to cost more and it's going to change the grid. So I'm curious how you think about workforce in your strategy from the work that you're doing, if it's ever, a challenge to getting something done, if GM is taking any actions to, build a resilient workforce that can provide all of the solutions and services that we need to, build out V2G, but also build out all the utility scale work that you're doing.
So, yeah, so
Your mic is. Run away from your.
my mic ran away. It is an area that we pay attention to, and I will say two things to that. One,
as you look at workplace growth and opportunities, I think it's skilled trades as a whole. It's not just electricians. We need a lot more skilled trades in this country. I help coach swimming, and I've had several swimmers come up to me and ask about different career opportunities and everything else. Two of them ended up being linemen or going through their apprentice program because we need a lot of power lines to be built too. So, when you look at the traditional electrician that's going into there, we need the traditional electrician that understands to do that HVAC, and these jobs pay well. And I think it's to some degree making sure that the guidance counselors and others, that are kind of there as they decide what kind of career path to go to, or coaches for that matter, say, hey, what's your interest? And if you find an interest you're in, maybe you should go down the path of apprenticing an electrician, because we are really short. That is one of the things that will hold us back is HVAC, electricians, some of the skilled trades that are out there today. Having needed an electrician a couple times here in the last several weeks, it does take time, and time usually means uncomfortable somewhere. And it's not the person who's coming out to fix your air conditioner, it's the person who's using the air conditioner. So it's a very valid point that you bring up, and one that has to be really, I think, addressed in this country. I mean, we are lucky back in World War II, a lot of them came out of that, went into these types of trades. We do not have that nowadays.
Yeah, and I'll add too, Michigan's in a little bit of a conundrum because we continue to need to do a better job of graduating 4-year and higher education. And so in Michigan, it's a little bit of a struggle too, because we've got to be having some higher numbers of college graduates in order to fulfill an innovation economy. Munir, do we have any online?
One question, and it is, how is GM using its purchasing power to push for decarbonization that is also equitable for low-income communities near your plants?
How is GM using their purchasing power to push for
Decarbonization
and equity
also equitable for low-income communities near your plants.
for low-income communities and plants? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so we are working quite closely with the supplier partnership, which really does scale up not just GM, but other automotive companies as well as our supply chain in order to decarbonize. So those are some of the examples that we do that. I would go back to where we source our renewables, which are generally within proximity of our manufacturing sites. I mean, if you're at the Northwest Ohio wind farm, you literally can stand on top of the Defiance foundry and see the wind farm that supplies power to that facility. So it is truly going after locations where we have an immediate impact to the emissions of those locations. And so there's a lot of emphasis and focus on that space. I also think that's where vehicle to grid can play a big role, as we scale up the amount of EVs out there that have V2G capabilities. Not only are you shifting from a cost perspective, but you're shifting from a fossil fuel perspective, and you have the ability to actually utilize cleaner resources one way or the other, whether it's through the vehicle or when those resources are actually generating. Good question.
One more question?
With your experience over the years, can you talk about maybe some of the learnings that you've had of when, maybe retrofitting or like adding solar to a factory that was running on power separately, or thinking about how you look at efficient equipment within the factories for lower use, and as you look globally, you've probably had different challenges and learnings. So there's a lot of difference between retrofitting versus greenfield. And how do you kind of, have you managed through that throughout the years? And especially as some of these students are done, kind of learning systems, they're not going to be all new, but how to make some of the less efficient, less, more emissions factories, better, from an efficiency standpoint.
So that is a phenomenal question. That is a very challenging question because as we look at greenfield sites, yes, we can build in extra electrical capacity. We can build in beefing up the truss so we can potentially put solar on the rooftop. If we look at a lot of our existing facilities, there is not that luxury. We don't have the ability to put solar on the rooftop or spread it way out, which then decreases the end efficiency. We may want to interconnect battery storage, and we come to find out we don't have the electrical capacity to put battery storage. And so, or the interconnect won't allow us because while we have the capacity, the utility doesn't have the capacity. So it does take a lot of close coordination as we work across these areas that are so relatively new for all these companies talking in an area that we didn't. It usually meant build us a wire, and the wire build enough for us to manufacturing our goods and services. Now it's build us a wire that may go that way and then may go that way and is going that way the way it needs to be, from a safety and from a operations perspective, because you do have to think about safety too, because that wire going that way is going to a substation that there could be some work being done at that substation. So a lot of the new rules and regulations that are in that space are really looking at each one of these areas to ensure one, protection of the employees, which is utmost important when it comes to the bi-directional element that we're getting to see the benefits from, but we need to make sure safety wise we've done.
Yay. Any other questions? All right, I think we're at time. So before I ask you to help me thank Rob for being here, I want to mention that we're back here December 5th. Sally Tallberg, President and CEO of Michigan Saves, Michigan's first green bank, and former chair of the Michigan Public Service Commission. So a nice combination of NGO world and public world and talking about finance. So hope you'll join us then. So help me in thanking Rob for his time today and for the great conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Sally will be great, so you'll enjoy that
That's
one.
awesome. Please take some bagels.